Hello and welcome to Ventures and Visionaries, Episode 7, Navigating Financial Waters. I'm your host, Mordy Hackel, an entrepreneur, business founder, strategic consultant, people developer, and problem solver. This podcast is about people, entrepreneurship, business, and innovation. How do these areas contrast and complement? How do we create leverage and multiplication using these resources that are at our fingertips? Today, my guest is Nelson Tepfer. He is co-founder and CEO at Pro CFO Partners. Pro CFO Partners believes in democratizing access to high-caliber financial leadership. Their unique model enables companies to benefit from the insight and guidance of seasoned CFOs without the overhead of a full-time executive. This approach not only optimizes financial performance, but also fosters sustainable success. Nelson holds an MBA from NYU's Stern School of Business, which is where my daughter is studying right now. So we could talk about that moment. But Nelson, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Mordy, and great to be here. So looking forward to today's conversation. So as you've touched on all the highlights, and it's always fun listening to someone else read everything, on your side of things. But yes, I'm the co-founder CEO here at Pro CFO Partners. We're up to a team of now nearly 60 in helping business owners guide their success through the lens of the CFO, helping them build this framework for financial management, their growth that's really going to help them succeed. And I'm sure we'll unpack that a whole lot more as we go through this conversation. I've been doing this kind of work for close to 15 years now. Did this on my own, did this as part of a different organization, and realized, okay, what is really the best way to do this? And let's figure out a way to build this. And that's where me and my business partner co-founded this company now 4.5 years ago.
Congratulations. It sounds like the success is really wonderful. Maybe expand on how you decided to go fractional.
So I think I got into the space a little bit backwards or a little differently than most. I think most who enter the fractional space are either in between roles or they're thinking about what they want to do next. I was what I thought at the time happily employed as a full-time CFO. When a friend of mine reached out to me and said a friend of his is having some trouble with his company, can I have a conversation and maybe give him some advice? And I was like, help out a friend of a friend? Sure, we'll have a conversation. And that conversation turned into a year-long interim CFO role that I actually juggled with my full-time role. So it was a ridiculously busy year, but what I found by doing this, and I use this word so carefully, it was so much more fun working like this. I learned a new business, new company, new industry, and the things that were day-to-day in my previous role was like magic to a company like this. And so I said, if this is so much more fun, I want to do more of this. So I went back to my full-time role and converted it into a part-time one, and then started taking on clients on my own. Over the next 7 to 8 years, I did this on my own across probably about a dozen different industries, from start-size companies, anywhere from startups to close to $500 million in revenue, and I loved it. The problem is when you do this kind of work on your own, you keep running into some variations of the same 3 challenges again and again and again. And as a high level, those 3 challenges are essentially it is difficult to develop and deliver at the same time. And this is true of every high level independent consultant when they do things like this. The second one is as a result of being different, juggling the development and delivery, you end up with a feast or famine. You're either way too busy or not busy enough. But then the third reason was probably the biggest impetus that led me down this path. And that's that when you do this on your own, you only have your own experience and expertise to offer. And you don't have teammates or colleagues to bounce ideas off of. You don't have that kind of you only have the expertise that you actually have and you've already done from your own life experiences and own work experiences. So in looking for ways to do this bigger and better, I was looking at ways. I didn't really like what I found by and large what was in the marketplace. I did join one firm that was pretty big in the UK and they were trying to replicate their success here. It didn't work for various reasons, but it was there that I met my business partner. And the last year that we were both part of that organization, we kept having some variation of the same conversation over and over and over again. And it was something along the lines of, is this really the best way to do this? And best was not about our own ego. Best was really about, is this best for our team and is this best for our clients?
Right.
The answer was no. And so we were faced with a decision. We can either stop complaining about it or we can go build it. And Mordy, you've known me for a little bit, but me and my business partner aren't really the type of people to stop complaining about it if we think there's something wrong. So we launched this company in January of 2020.
Well, it sounds like you did stop complaining about it, though.
Well, that was the decision.
In a different kind of way.
To do something. And so we launched this company in January of 2020. whereas the two of us plus 6 CFOs, and like I said, across our team now, there are nearly 60 of us.
Congratulations. That sounds like a great success. If I recall correctly, and I met you at an entrepreneurial operating system event, EOS, for maybe I call it correctly or incorrectly. I don't know. That's what I call it. In any event, some people refer to it as EOS. In any event, is that the model that you typically tend to leverage for growing your business?
So we use it, as a toolkit. It is an incredibly powerful tool to bring structure and clarity to organizations. So we use it. Many of our clients do, many of them don't. We do believe there is an aspect to the clarity that needs to be brought into an organization. So if our clients are not running on that, then usually that we'll be involved in the conversations like, what are we working towards as an organization? What is that? What is our North Star? What do we need to be doing today that's going to help us get there?
Yeah.
But frankly, that's the way every business should be operating, whether they're running on EOS or running on any other system out there. It's really about how do we bring that structure and clarity into an organization to drive their success.
And from a financial standpoint, which I think is, your strength and area of expertise, I'd obviously, as a business owner and somebody who took accounting for a couple of years in school, I have a little bit of a background. I don't think I know enough to be dangerous, but I know enough to understand when I don't understand. So then the question starts to become, how does a fractional CFO create leverage and opportunity? I mean, we do that on the technology side. We could speak about that momentarily, but on the CFO side, how does one create that leverage for a business owner to be able to understand and navigate the financial waters?
So we'll take fractional out of that statement for a moment, because it's not about fractional versus full-time. It is really more the impact and outcome of a CFO's perspective on an organization. And frankly, whether they have a CFO title or not. And I think it's important to actually look at it first from that point of view and then figure out, okay, what is the best way to get this perspective in an organization? So the CFO's perspective is, as companies grow and scale, this is when the finance and accounting function needs to shift from strictly an operational, like we closed our books, or yes, we did our bank recs last month, or yes, we finished everything so we can file our taxes, to it needs to shift from that operational level into a strategic level around what should we be doing based on the results that we've had. This is where we were. This is where we want to be. What are the decisions and insights that we need to be gleaning from this information to help us make the decisions moving forward? Now, that is a very, we can unpack this more, but if you think about the true impact of that CFO's perspective, it's changing that finance and accounting function from strictly an operational and reactive function into a strategic and proactive one that guides a company's success. As an oversimplification of the impact of this role.
Yeah. So for our business owners that are listening, would this be a revenue target, a ceiling of complexity issue? How does one know that one's reached that point where they do need to shift their operations?
So it's one of the most common questions we get, which is, hey, Nelson, when do we need you as a fractional and when do we need you as a full-time? And my answer, perhaps surprises some, because it's not a specific number. Frankly, every organization, no matter its size, no matter its tenure, every organization needs a CFO's perspective. It's really a question of A, who's providing it, and B, when is that current perspective no longer good enough that you need to upgrade it, or you hit that skill wall with the way it's currently being provided to the organization. For many business owners, especially when they're first starting and growing in those early years, they are providing that perspective. It doesn't mean they are a CFO, just they are the ones involved in driving that strategic level conversation through the finances. And then as they build the pieces underneath, great, they get the bookkeeper, internal or external, they start bringing in the senior accountants or staff accountants or controller people, great. These pieces begin to grow, these pieces begin to get larger and more complex. It's really a question of when they hit that skill wall, that what they currently have in place is no longer good enough for them, that they should begin to look at what is the right solution for them. Does that mean fractional? Sometimes that does mean full-time. We tend to think most companies don't need full-time, and we can unpack why as we continue through this conversation. We think most organizations don't need a full-time, but every organization needs a CFO's perspective. It's just a question of who's providing it.
And I think when you and I spoke offline at some point, you differentiated and maybe alluded to this a little bit beforehand, that the CFO's perspective is more long range and leverage with the dollars rather than, as you mentioned before, operational.
Correct. But it is also about building that function so it can support the longer range or future. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are pieces that need to be built to support this. everything from which systems are you using, and obviously you get involved a lot of times on the technology side of which systems they're using, but that
all the
informs the
time.
conversation of how do we get the insight we need. If we're not capturing the information we need at that front end, there's no way we can get to insight for what comes out of it. So it's that level of, okay, what does need to be built in this finance and accounting function that's going to support that level of strategic insight moving forward. And very often for many of our clients, when they're coming to us, there is that level of, I feel like I've been running this on gut instinct for too long. Whether they are or are not truly running it on gut instinct, that is a sentiment we very often hear. Now, usually as business owners, they're not really running it on gut instinct, right? They have some information, they have the insight, but very often they feel like it because they're not getting the support they need to make the decisions that they have to.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, or certainly on the KJ front, we see very similar type of experiences. So oftentimes people understand how to use the more basic of the technologies, but when it gets to either a little bit more sophisticated or when the group becomes large enough that the complexity warrants it, then some form of both strategic advice as well as tactical operations become very much in order.
Absolutely true. I'll give you one other fun story that probably highlights this. We were talking to a business owner, and he says, KPIs, right? He was talking about we were talking about KPIs and what it's supposed to do, and he says, no, my controller, she gives me the KPIs every month. I said, great. She tells you what they were? Yes. And I said, does she tell you what they should be? Really highlighting that difference between a strictly operational function of telling what happened versus what should, and therefore what we need to change that helps you get there.
Yeah. And I think that it's, again, I'm going to draw on my own experience over here, and I don't know if this is true for many companies, but at least in my experience, finance can very often be a lagging indicator of your success. And being able to talk about projections and the future financial health, and obviously nobody can predict the future, but maybe you can talk for a few moments about how does one start to think about managing a company in uncertain times, financially speaking, obviously, and maybe other ways as well.
So there's several components that go into that, and I'll touch on a few, and then we'll weave this all together. Some of this becomes, obviously, you need to understand where the company is currently. You need to understand objectively where the company is trying to go. But more importantly, you need to build a structure and function that is agile and can respond to change quickly enough. So the reason why we talk about those, because even common terminology like budgeting, for instance, right? Standard budgeting process, and you've probably been through various formats of what budgeting has looked like as your organization has grown and scaled yourself. But the standard budgeting process is, okay, how much money did we spend last year? Great. How much do we think we're going to grow? We're going to add this percentage across all these different things that we're spending, and here's our budget. And look, at various points in time, that's better than not doing anything at all, and that's okay. From our perspective as CFOs, the conversation looks a little bit different. It becomes, okay, what are we trying to work towards over the next 3 to 5 years as an organization? What are we trying to build towards? And then budgeting becomes, okay, where do I need to be investing today that's going to actually help me get there? And what return on that investment should I be getting that's going to support that trajectory we're setting for this organization? And so building that kind of plan, and this is where, again, you asked reacting to uncertain times, budget is a living document. That forecast becomes living as how you're actually doing this. You have to track what's happening, and you have to actually put in what is it that you assume that's going to happen, that therefore this is the result that you get. Because if you're not keeping track of that, after a certain point in time, you look back and it's like, wait a minute, we're way off over here. Now what do we need to do? Whereas if that becomes a constant tracking of like, okay, this month we're looking at this is where we thought we would be, this is where we are. Do we understand why we're different? Okay, great. We can keep moving in this direction. Or are we way off base? We need to change everything of what we're doing. Because the problem comes when we wait to react until past certain things. Now, this is, by the way, is a fun challenge for most business owners because by and large, entrepreneurs are overly optimistic. I think they kind of have to be, or they wouldn't be entrepreneurs, frankly. So entrepreneurs, by and large, like, no, everything is going to work out. It's going to be fine. It's going to happen. Of
course it's going to work out.
Exactly.
It always works out, right? Exactly. The best possible way. Thank you, Murphy.
Exactly. But it's that CFO's perspective. It's like, okay, let's do this scenario planning, right? We have these base cases around if this goes as planned, if this goes a little bit off track, or if we end up in another kind of black swan event, like what is it that we need to do? But more importantly, we can pre-program the decisions that we know we need to make. If we don't hit this, this is what we need to do, so that we can actually track, are we getting close to this? When do we need to make these decisions? When we actually need to pull the triggers on these things quickly, so we're not waiting till too far after the fact and then actually hurting the company.
It sounds like a lot of the strategic value may even have to do with pre-planning for if the events don't work out the way you assume they will.
Well, that really does become part of it. And that's why I wove the three different statements together, is understanding where we are,
Sure.
understanding where we go, and understanding the plan we're building that helps us get there. Because that plan, to a certain degree, has to have the clear levers of what we're actually pulling or pushing that help us get there. So we know when we need to change course. So we know when we need to make certain decisions along the way that are going to help us continue to achieve this. No plan. Well, you can use whatever quote you'd like to illustrate the sentiment, right? No plan survives contact with the enemy, whether you use the army terms, whether you use anything, the boxing terms, every plan you have until you get punched in the face. Like, there's all kind of variations. Nothing happens according to specifically plan, especially in the business world. But when you have that clarity, you can react faster. When you have the function in place that can actually move, you have that knowledge, you have that insight to change course faster, or you have the insight to know, no, we should stay the course because this is what we actually know will happen, or based on this, we feel confident that this is the result we will achieve.
It's interesting. And over the years, we've obviously built technology roadmaps as well as budgets on the technology front for our clients. I often wonder to what degree people get so enamored with their own ideas that they're not able to actually flexibly adapt no, I'm serious. It may be a joke, but it's a true statement.
Not. It's not. We refer to that as developing or ideating in an echo chamber, right? Everyone in the room is also excited about what they're doing. And it's like, great. Do your customers care? Like, are they interested in all of this? Like, we built this wonderful
Not so
thing.
much. No, thank you. Okay, let's close up shop and go home.
And there's like some fun expressions, right? It's the, my favorite expression, and you come across this a lot, obviously, when you're dealing with some venture or startup kind of companies, of which we have several, but we have companies all sizes and stages of their organization. But the venture stages, you hear this a lot, right? It looks like a solution that's looking for a problem. We build the best solutions out there. It doesn't mean we actually have the problem or what's involved, which is one of the key things when we start with companies, is one of the key things we need to understand, which is, what is their revenue model? What is the problem this organization is actually solving for their customers? And what is their solution? Who are these customers who are having these problems? Now, it's an oversimplification, a way of looking at it, but that clarity is really important, because when we lose sight of that, that's where you get to that kind of conversation of, look, we built this wonderful solution. Great. What's the problem that the solution solves? Who has this problem? Like, does this make sense to really continue to do this? How are we going to get in front of those people who have this problem to explain why our solution is the best thing for them?
And whether or not the solution has longevity, or, whether it can even continue to exist and or scale beyond where it currently exists. I think that's a fascinating point, because if you're trying to build a business in an uncertain economic times, what you're trying to find is some form of predictability. And, obviously what you as a CFO would be looking for is the ability to match, I would imagine, the forecasted budget to reality as close as possible. Is that not the case?
Well, we'd like
Or is that the other way around?
The plan exists, but it's based off of what we know of our market. So we have to understand the market dynamics in order to actually be relevant, in order for the plan to be relevant. Again, we can go there and come up with a plan in a vacuum. Sure, we can just pull out a plan and say, right, here's what we think is going to happen. What is that based on? Where is this actually coming from? And that's why I said we truly need to understand where we are currently and where we're actually trying to go, so we can build the plan to get from A to B.
So do you think that if the company is successful in spite of itself, it doesn't really understand where they're going and what they're doing, and yet somehow they manage?
Yep.
Is that good or bad?
So
big loaded question.
I don't think that's either good or bad. Frankly, I think to a certain degree that's necessary in an entrepreneur's journey. Like, if they knew how hard it was going to be when they were starting, how many of them would truly start a company? If they knew all the problems they would run into, how many of them were like, yes, sign me up for all of that. That's going to be fun. So I think to a certain degree, that naivete almost becomes necessary, to actually go on that journey. That being said, It's the entrepreneurs who recognize, like, okay, now I'm out way over my skis. Now this is when I need help. This is when I've reached this skill wall of what I can do and drive. And this is the pieces that I'm missing, that they begin to build out the rest of the team that supports this. And that's where they look for that CFO's perspective. That's where they look for the technology solutions. Like, okay, great. This is what I was able to figure out and build internal to the company, but this isn't good enough anymore because we've grown past this. And this is true across many functions of the company. And it's those business owners and leaders who recognize that begin to build scalable organizations. Business owners can all get to a certain point in time. They can all reach a certain level. It's when they recognize that they've A, hit the wall, or B, it's like, okay, we've gone over this, but now we're shrinking, or now things are changing. What are we going to do about it? That's when the scalability of an organization really, it's obviously a lot better if they start building the scalability earlier on, but very often they don't. But that's when they really need to actually start saying, okay, what are the pieces we need to build to be scalable now?
So, and that obviously requires a team and money, and that doesn't happen in a vacuum. And presumably that's an intentional event that people actually recognize the fact we're about to grow because either we're planning to or the market just outstripped their abilities. How does one sit down and develop the 3 to 5 year financial forecast and plan?
So before you talk about financial, we also talk about when we are involved in building that plan, the process that we go through is a 5-3-1 planning, not the other way around. We actually like looking at the distance first and then going back. The problem is when we do strategic planning going 1-3-5, and just for reference, you're talking about years, 1-3-5 or 5-3-1, we find when companies go 1-3-5, they end up with what we refer to as step-up goals, right? 1 year from now, well, it's okay, that's simple. Where are we today? So 1 year, we're going to be, this year plus whatever percentage we think we're going to grow. And then we do 3 years, we just add on whatever that is from there, and 5, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you go 5 years, it allows you to think of, it allows you to whiteboard it, like think bigger picture, think dreams, think other things that you may want to actually accomplish. And when you start working backwards from there, it's fascinating to see what happens once you actually document and build that plan, because we had a client where we ran through this process where they were starting to check off things on their 3-year objectives within 6 months, just because they had the clarity of like, oh, we know we're going to get there anyway, and we're already doing this. If we just add this other piece, we're going to check off that, and that's actually going to happen as well. So just that level of clarity is important. But one distinction I will make from the way you phrase this, and I think is important for business owners to understand, the goal is different from an objective. And the reason why that clarity becomes important, the goal is different from simply a number, a revenue target. You ask so many business owners where they want to be 3 years from now or 5 years from now, they're all going to get a revenue number, right? They're going to be 100 million in 3 years. They're going to be 5 billion, whatever it is in 5 years. And we look at that as a measurable target of achieving the goal, not the goal itself. And the distinction becomes important whenever it comes to planning. Because if you have a goal that's separate from a number, for instance, if you want to be the best, or you want to be the biggest within this region, or you want to launch in 60, when you have other goals that you get to set that are thematic instead of strictly a measurable target of a goal, the decisions that you make are much clearer, because then it becomes, okay, if we're going to do this, does this help us get to there, yes or no? You wouldn't be able to answer that if you was like, well, does this help us get to this revenue number? Because to a certain degree, it's like, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe this only gets us to 80%. Maybe this gets up to 120% of that number. Whereas if it's a thematic, like for instance, if you want to be the largest within a region, or number 1 or 2 within a region, that's a clear goal that you can understand, because then it becomes, okay, we know we need to invest in our customer service team. Does building out the customer service team get you 100 million? We don't know. Does building it out make you better in that industry? Absolutely. In which case then it becomes, should we do this? Yes or no? And then you can get into the how you do that comes afterward, but allows the decisions to become binary. Yes or no, does it help us achieve our goal? Instead of, if you have it as a measurable target, if you're just a revenue number, yes or no becomes a lot more difficult to predict.
Yeah, I will also say that one of the questions I wanted to ask you would be, from your perspective, I wanted to ask you your perspective on bootstrapping versus raising money. And I think you're addressing that indirectly on the thematic decisions, meaning if you can figure out the themes based on the way you're describing things, you can theoretically understand very quickly if this is something you can sustain the growth for.
Absolutely true. So bootstrapping versus raising money is always an interesting concept, and it's also how it's approached. Is it we're going to do it on our own until we run out of money, and then we're going to go raise money, which is probably the wrong way to do it, versus no, this is our plan for how we're going to get there, and we know this are the steps that need to happen in place. thematically, whether it's better to raise money or to do this yourself, it's truly, it really starts with understanding what does raising money entail, and what are the ramifications if you raise money, because you now need to report to outside investors. This is obviously no longer entirely your own endeavor at this point in time. They have certain expectations, they have certain protections in place. Usually, if they're sophisticated investors, there are certain pieces that come into play when you're dealing with an investor as stakeholders versus if it's just your own money that you're playing with, you or your partner's money, whatever you have on that side of things. So it's truly understanding what does it mean when you say you're going to go actually bring on investors into this side of things. And then it becomes, what type of investments are you looking for? The friends and family round? Are you going to go more sophisticated? The VC, Series A, B, C, D, E, or all the other ones you can go to on that side of things. But frankly, those should be means to achieve an objective, not the objective itself. The objective is not to raise money. The goal is not to raise money. Raising money should be helping you achieve that goal of what you're setting. There are some businesses that we've worked with where it is absolutely predicated on being able to raise money, in which case raising money becomes a strategic objective that they need to plan for, because that's the only way they can achieve that goal. So it's not binary. You must fund it yourself, or you must raise money. It's what is the place of capital raising in what you are trying to build.
Would you, just maybe to drill in a smidge more, would you consider the moral side of the obligation quadrant part of the, I know you spoke about, not ethical, you spoke about legal as well as expectations. Would you consider anything on the morality side there as well, or not so relevant?
Can you expand on that question?
Theoretically, right? So who was I talking to? I was talking to somebody a while back who was talking about advising young entrepreneurs who were coming up with software ideas. And some of the folks that were looking to raise money, they felt like they would just raise money and, whatever happened. They kind of didn't really think like there was some form of ethical responsibility and a lifestyle shift, because I now, it's not just that they have expectations of me. Great. So they have expectations of me. What happens if it doesn't work out? Fine, it doesn't work out. But if it does work out, but how do I approach it as the person has taken custody of said money? Do I need to change the way I think about my business? I don't know. There's just an interesting perspective, at least for me, it was.
No, it is. And, frankly, sophisticated investors are better at weeding out the things that they want or don't want to be investing in. And so those scenarios that you described, I would imagine most of them struggled to actually raise the capital they thought they would or wouldn't be able to raise if that was their mentality as it relates to raising money. Especially more recently, as money has tightened, or as risk-free money has started returning higher investments, and so taking on the risks of certain things become much higher. But frankly, I was rather pleasantly surprised to see various, conversations in the VC space when they started talking about, oh no, now we need to actually shift to profitability. So the CFO in me is like, yeah, I should hope so. You want to be investing in profitable businesses, whereas previously, when money was a lot looser, it was no, just invest in growth, just grow, and we'll figure out how to make money later on. And to be fair, there are many wildly successful companies, household names today, which were built on that model. So it's not right or wrong. The problem and the challenge is those that are successful doing that are so few and far between. To assume that what you're building is actually going to achieve that level of status, that's the challenge that I think most entrepreneurs who dream don't necessarily understand what went into actually that being successful that way. Most businesses need to build an actual profitable business. Can you get investors to support this? Yes, but they need to understand what their return on investment is going to be. And the answer at this stage is a lot less of, oh, well, we'll just get you to the next round of funding, and then that's how you're going to make money. Because frankly, more and more of them are recognizing the need to actually have true business cases for what they're doing. And the tightening of money has frankly made investors a lot more picky with where they choose to invest their money.
Understandably so. What would you recommend for companies that are in the process of either looking for money or trying to conserve cash because money is more scarce now? How would you go about, navigating the financial markets?
So two separate sides to that question. We'll talk about managing cash, because this is true in general, regardless of whether you're trying to raise money or not. Obviously, in order to manage cash flow, you need to understand your cash flow, and you need to be able to forecast your cash flow. That becomes the first stage in understanding what is missing or what are you actually going to need and how long do you have to get till you need to get it. So there's an aspect to what can you build from a cash flow forecast, and therefore what can you actually manage to that cash flow forecast, and therefore what decisions need to be made if you don't have the option of getting that money in. So that's really where we start, is understanding your cash position and forecasting the cash position, because if you need to raise, and you know by when you need to raise, because you need to know what conversations you need to be having along the way that help you get there. When you talk about raising money, then it becomes, are we talking about debt or equity? Again, and how large are we talking about? Many banks are still lending money to actually good businesses out there. So from, not to oversimplify, but frankly, understanding which banks have an appetite and how you need to present your financials to banks to actually get just regular basic financing is something that gets lost for many entrepreneurs as they grow their business. We're like, well, I filled out this form online and they turned me down. Well, it's usually a little more complicated than that, and therefore how you navigate and what you should be doing on that side looks a little bit different. But going to investors, a lot of this becomes, again, as an oversimplification. An investor wants to understand why they should trust their money to you and what's the return they're going to get. And therefore, it's how you present that case is really where, how relevant that is for them. How well and how quickly and simply you present that case is really what drives the results. We've seen all different versions of various investor decks, and many of them are really interesting. But if they're, to your point that you said earlier, many of them are so busy touting their own story instead of what it actually means as a business case and or why an investor should care.
Interesting. Let's pivot right now to talk a little bit about technology.
Sure.
It's near and dear to my heart, quite obviously. Let's talk about technology tools and the technology as it's evolving, and your view of how businesses and the CFO role in particular will be using new technologies. You can speak of AI if you'd like, or anything else that you may be aware of that I'm probably not.
So I have a feeling this is probably more the technology that you are aware of that I am not. So maybe I should switch and I'll be asking you the questions now. No, I'm kidding. That being,
you can ask me whatever questions you'd like.
I'll share the CFO's perspective on this first, because I do think your insight here is just as relevant as it relates to how we operate within organizations. Because it's a very wide-ranging topic. I'm going to talk about a few different buckets as we think about this, and then, like I said, your insight here may be just as, if not more relevant than mine. Our perspective, there's an aspect to what technology means as it relates to infrastructure to help run a company versus productivity investments to actually drive greater return on capital, versus new ways of doing something that we have not even explored yet. And those distinctions become important because they get mixed very often, and therefore the decision-making process of when to spend money on these things becomes less clear. As companies scale, they absolutely need to be investing in their infrastructure, whether that's new systems, new technologies, new things that actually help them do this better. Just think about your own entrepreneurial journey, right? The technology you used when you first opened this business X number of years ago, and you can choose to answer that if you like, looks very different than the way it is today.
It would certainly be one hell of a funny story, but we can continue that another time.
But the fascinating thing is you've watched this happen with your clients as well. They great, we need to spin up this company, so we're going to use this system, we're going to use this technology, we're going to have these programs, and it's going to work. And it does to a certain degree up to a certain point in time. Similar to the finance and accounting function, technology becomes that same conversation: is where are we spending our money? What are we getting from doing this? And is there a better way we should be looking at this? We talk about this in our systems and process area that we dive into. We focus on it through the financial, a lot of the time, systems and processes within an organization, but it touches the technology pieces. Because what happens is businesses outgrow what they have. And most business owners are not they're not the finance experts any more than they are the technology experts. And so they just keep doing certain things, either because they don't know any different, or it's working well enough, I don't need to think about it, right? It's not causing me enough pain that I need to change it yet, kind of thing. And it's that same perspective, I think, that is just as relevant on your side. Is yes, it's not causing this much pain, but there's a strategic element to how you should be thinking about this to drive your business growth. Where should you be focusing on this? I'm going to shift the conversation to AI for a second, because that's obviously the buzzword of the day. AI, and we're very aware of this, but to a large degree, the challenge with AI is to a certain degree, everyone thinks about the how instead of the, what we can potentially do with this. And that distinction becomes important, because if you can dream it, there are ways to build this with these kind of things with AI. So it's how you actually build. The how becomes fascinating as a conversation so much as you're limited only by your what. And so it's the dreamers that really can take advantage of the AI world much more so than some of the others in this space within an organization who are operationally focused. But businesses should be thinking about more ways it can be used for them. There are far wider applications beyond what most people think about, where it's not just like, oh, great, I can go there and it can tell me what I should write on my LinkedIn post now. Yeah, it can do that. But there's a whole other ways. But that's one type of AI in one specific format and one specific use. There's a whole bunch of different ways about what it can be done. Everything from automating certain steps in a sales process to building more different pieces. And again, AI itself is a dangerous word when it comes to this, and I say dangerous. Frankly, it's more all-encompassing and even more narrowly focused than people recognize. So people use AI interchangeably with automation, with RPA, with every other bunch of different ways that refer to what I'll call loosely technology that has been around for a whole lot longer. So I'm a big fan of anything that gets people to think about investing in productivity in a company is great. You want to bucket it all under the AI, word? I'm fine with that. It is frankly far wider ranging on that side of things. But I know one company, for instance, just to highlight this, they built a program essentially that replaced 3 people's work that used to be done manually. Now, technically, it was actually done through an RPA, not through AI, but they were thinking about this. Well, we invested in AI and did this. And I'm like, I don't care what you call it. You invested in productivity. It got you this kind of thing. Great. How do we do more of this? It's more that
Yes,
side of things as it relates to AI conversation.
and this conversation opens up about 6 or 7 different avenues to go down, and I can name them. But let's start with just the R&D bucket, if you will, right? Because people are making investments, and some of the stuff you don't really know that it's going to work. You kind of hope it will, but you have a good sense maybe, or maybe you've done some market research, or maybe you've actually hired people to tell you that it should work, or you've, designated some time internally to be able for people to do investigation and testing. How, from a financial point of view, is there a good? Let's take services firms for starters, and then we can switch to other types of firms. Is there a particular area or a guide that you would say for an R&D for a classic services firm, say an accounting firm?
So you say services. Very often I find that it has more to do with the profile of leadership than it does with the industry that they are in as to how they think
Oh,
about
interesting.
R&D and what they should be
Okay.
thinking about R&D. Accountants by and large, if you think of the traditional old school accounting firm where you're probably going to have whatever number of partners who are a certain age, usually they're not as proactively thinking perhaps about AI. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be. It's just very often their mentality is, well, if it ain't broke, it's okay. What's forcing many more firms to be looking at this, and this is a good and a bad thing for the industry as a whole, is that they've been struggling with talent for years. And so if you can't get people, you have to invest in productivity, which is why in the accounting space you are seeing more and more different ways of doing this. There have been various formats of trying of this for years already of automating this. And I think in the last year and a half, obviously, since the true launch of this AI revolution, we'll call it, that obviously has highlighted various ways of actually doing this. But I think every organization should be thinking about productivity as it relates to this, how much they invest in it. Well, frankly, a lot of this comes down to, how much time, and this really comes to understanding your organization. What are you currently doing, which is taking up more time or frankly more resources than it should? And sometimes, to your point, it does mean bringing in an expert, even just to review what can be done differently. Bring a different perspective to the table. Very often we get so focused, that tunnel vision kind of mindset that we get focused of only within our own
Yeah.
world. And sometimes it does require bringing in somebody else who can think differently. It doesn't mean you need to follow every single thing that they say, but I'm fascinated at what happens when when organizations bring in a different perspective, whether they use it or not. Just bringing another head to the table has them thinking about things differently that they may never have very previously. So I would encourage every organization, if they're even thinking about exploring this, have a conversation with some expert in the space. Talk about some challenges you're facing. Don't get into the hows. Have them come to you with how technology can solve the problem. But bring your problems to other experts in the space across these industries, because you will find there are other solutions out there. And we get stuck very often thinking about, well, there's no other way anyone else can solve it because I haven't solved it yet. And that is a very limiting point of view, but it is one very many entrepreneurs fall into. And we understand why. Look, think about everything they've built to get to where they are.
Yeah. I heard this once from a speaker in the IT industry. He said that entrepreneurs generally tend to have a fairly large ego, and they tend to think that they can solve and deal with anything better than everyone else. In fact, he went up to say, and I can order pizza better than the next guy. So I thought that was a pretty funny way of putting it, but
It is.
it underscores your point quite literally.
But that's why it's so important to bring other perspectives to the table. And frankly, this actually holds true and ties back to an earlier point. This also holds true with building out a leadership team or building out a team internally. You need more people. We need more people around that table because they think about things differently. They'll process things differently that you may not have. It doesn't mean every single thing that gets brought to the table you must do, but it sparks the conversation, it sparks the ideas of how to think about how to approach problems differently, and frankly, where different solutions can come from.
And being able to truly take ideas and build them in a novel way is exactly what differentiates people from machines.
Yeah.
Who don't have that ability, at least today. Who knows what it'll be tomorrow? But speaking of that, any guidance for our listeners on putting sensitive financial data in third-party AI or other AI platforms? How would you guide people, and what would you think?
There's the prudent side there's my prudent answer, and then there's the actual practical, cynical answer to that. Frankly, these days, your information is just about everywhere anyone really wants to find it anyway. Most people can't protect their stuff the way people's illusion of protection doesn't really exist anyway, what that is. And frankly, you probably see more boots on the ground and recognizing that even more than we do. There are definitely protections in place, but frankly, there's an aspect to recognizing most of the organizations that you need to understand what exposure you probably have. And people don't understand this with the way they've put things up everywhere to various places. But that speaks more to the education and understanding the risks, more so then that's true even beyond AI, even beyond in general. I think for years, most of us have grown used to having instant accessibility and not necessarily recognizing the cost of exposure when we talk about instant accessibility to everything. It's like, I want this now to me. Great. But then in order for that to happen, this information needs to be held here. It needs to flow this way. These people need access to this in order for you to have this now. And frankly, it's great that you understand the risks that you're involved, but does everybody else in your organization who's involved in that process understand the risks of this information flowing back and forth this way?
I would argue the answer to that is absolutely not, because very often, and we see this quite often, is that I'll pull out either a personal or even a corporate credit card and register for a solution online that does solve my problem, but it doesn't solve the company's problem. And what's at least in my industry, called shadow IT is becoming an increasingly large issue. Probably not as much for the CFO, because again, you're talking about, $20-30 here and there, but the value of the information that's out there that's potentially out of the company's control or even purview, they don't even know it exists, may be very interesting.
It is. And there's also an aspect, look, as on the personal side, I've joked about this, frankly, we've been selling our information to all the large technology companies for years without knowing about it. We haven't even been selling it. We've been giving it away for free. Think about all of our personal accounts that we have at all different places. You've literally been giving your entire information out for free, essentially for decades at this point.
We are the product.
We are the product is right. So on the business side, sometimes it becomes, it's not about the limiting of it, I'm not allowed to do this because who's going to have access to this? It's understanding the risks you take when you do this and therefore making the decisions as a result. And if you do not understand the risks, then talk to somebody who does. Yeah. They'll help you understand. It's not a scare aspect. These are the risks that happen. This is what most companies do. Just having that kind of conversation with an expert, frankly, like yourself or others in the space to actually understand the risks that companies take on when they do this or how they build their infrastructure. I think most business owners, again, they've done things a certain way for a certain period of time. They don't even understand the risks that they've built inherently into the company, the way they operate.
100%. 100%. And again, it does, to your point, it makes sense to take up, if I'm let's put on my business owner hat for a moment. As a business owner, to pause every, whatever period of time, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and just look back and say, well, I've built all this infrastructure. A, do I need this? B, is it sustainable? And C, what risks have I taken on, to your point, that I don't even know that I did? And whether I have the insight myself to figure that out, great, but I may need to bring in, and frankly, maybe we should, as business owners, bring in outside expertise to understand where the gaps might be.
Yep. We are a big believer in the business of expertise in general. I think it is truly important for business owners to recognize they've been successful, but their success is not necessarily their expertise. Their
Hmm.
success as a business owner, as a leader, that's different than being the expert in
Yeah.
every single thing and every single part of their business.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about when the generalist needs to become the expert, but that may outstrip his or her capability on that
Frankly,
level.
though,
May
and that's the limiting part. They think they need to be the expert in everything. To your point, they need to be better at ordering pizza than everybody else in their company. They
Yeah,
don't. They don't need
yeah.
to be the
Well,
IT expert. They don't need to be the financial expert. They need to be able to take the expertise of all these different peoples and make the decisions that they have to drive the company forward to where they want to take it. That's what they need to do.
so there's two parts that you said. Number one is they need to put together the people, and number two, they need to know what they want, which is
Yes.
what we talked about earlier.
Which is why we do very often the first things we do when we work with companies is we need to understand their goals. If they don't have it clear, we'll help them clarify that. It's one of the key elements.
Yeah.
We've done that as a workshop format. We've done that as their CFO. It doesn't need to be, oh, this is the way you must do this. But everyone needs to be on the same page with what we're working towards.
Yeah. Without that, it becomes very, very easy. The rowing analogy is easy because, if people are rowing on the right side and on the left side out of sync, the whole boat just goes in circles. And I guess that's where the rowing in the same direction
There you go.
becomes an expression for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, and maybe that's just in my mind because I think the crew, there was some crew rowing that was on TV last night, and I'm watching these guys and they're just going straight. I don't think I've ever taken a boat straight in my life. Hopefully business is a little bit different.
Very,
But
very
let's talk
true and
for
a great
now.
analogy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's talk for a moment about um, the balance of, you spoke a little bit about operation, you spoke about transformation, you spoke about strategic things that don't even exist. And do you find that from a dollars and cents perspective, business owners are more inclined to invest in incremental improvements or I'll call it monumental for lack of a better word, but leaps forward?
So, from my experience, they're more likely to invest in incremental, not because that's where they should be investing, but because that's what's easier for them to understand.
Okay.
And there's two parts to that statement when I made it this way. A,
Okay.
the people who are selling them the monumental transformation have not done a good job explaining to them why this is actually so impactful and what will happen and when it will happen, which you've been involved on both sides of that table. So you know exactly what I'm referring to, where by and large, it is difficult to actually go through that and go in that kind of conversation. But the incremental becomes
Yes.
easy, right? So if we just do this, this is what begins to happen in this period of time. That becomes easy for them to understand and to recognize what return or what that looks like for them to actually do. To your point, very often the bigger transformation can be disruptive to an organization. And they need to understand, if we're going to do this, why should we be disrupting the organization and what do we get from this versus incremental? It's like, okay, we begin to make these changes and things happen, okay, to a large degree. So incremental is almost always easier to do and easier for them to understand. It doesn't mean it's always a better return on investment.
Oh, it doesn't sound like it would be, as much like you said, the 531 company that was able to make massive leaps forward by cobbling together separate initiatives.
Yeah. And that's really what happens as it relates to monumental. Also, what we think is a monumental is not always monumental. So, very
Hmm.
often, again, as business owners, we get stuck in our own head, like, oh no, we can't do this because this is whatever that is. Really talk to the rest of your team, see what they think will actually happen around some of these kind of pieces. And frankly, if they recognize that if they're struggling with the challenge that this actually solves, even if it's a monumental change, many of them are willing to dive in because they know at the other side of this problem will not be there anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to take a little bit of a detour over here, talk a little bit about financial literacy. And how would you recommend for people to become more educated about the power of, there was a book years ago written, I think it was by Jack Stack, called The Great Game of Business, where he advocated open book management. And while I read probably 3 or 4 chapters of the book, it was a little too dense for me to understand, beyond the idea that it kind of makes sense for everybody in the firm to be able to understand the numbers of the business, at least on their level. So how would you, assuming you agree with that premise, which you may not, but if you do, how would you recommend that people, at least on their level, become adequately financially literate? Are there books, are there podcasts? How would you recommend people learn about the power of finance and growing their business through
So
finance?
let's talk about the concepts first. For many organizations, we've seen great game of business and the concepts and actually run a business that way. The open book management be very, very successful. We've also seen it be monumentally disastrous. So there's no universal like, oh, every company should do this versus this. I think to a large degree, as with most things, it depends on the organization, depends on the culture of the organization, depends on the people in that organization as to whether that'll be effective or the right way to do this. And right and wrong in business world is never, aside from ethically, is not very rarely as simple as, oh, this is right and this is wrong for us to do. Ethically, you can usually
Right.
you can get a pretty good sense of like, yeah, that's probably pretty wrong. We shouldn't do that. But I'm saying every other business decision is very rarely as binary or as black and white. So we have seen it help. I do believe where you can, giving team members insight into the impact that they have on the organization and what drives it, I think is critical. And not critical, not because like, oh no, we must do this or else, but it's critical with regards to engagement. It's critical with regards to them understanding this and actually looking out for the company's best interest instead of punching the clock to do their job. So it's that level of insight and clarity that I think is truly important, not necessarily, oh, I need to see this specific metric to know exactly what I did this day and what happened over here. If you can get to that level of clarity and open book side for team members, for the right team members, yes, absolutely, it is game changing to actually watch it happen within companies. But again, it needs to be the right organization, it needs to be the right team. So,
How would you recommend? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, please.
Well, please continue. I was going to ask how would you recommend for, let's just take a company XYZ, 50, 100 people, and they're looking to start implementing financial literacy for some of the middle folks in the firm.
So,
How would you recommend that happen?
I'll change the phrasing. There's a difference between financial literacy as it relates to understanding a balance sheet and or understanding the stock market versus understanding the impact their role has on financial performance. Because I actually think
Okay.
those are two different statements. Most people think
Okay.
of financial literacy as, oh, we know how to budget for ourselves and how to spend our money. So that's why I only want to clarify the statement. I only want to differentiate the statement for clarity. So we'll talk
Please.
about the
Thank you.
second one first, because I think that's more where we're looking to take this conversation around. How do you give stakeholders, team members, employees insight into the impact that their role has on the organization? And for some of them, it's obviously much clearer. Sales is always easiest. Frankly, sales always has the biggest insight into this because usually their compensation is pretty well tied to what they're actually doing, or it should be
Right.
tied to what they're doing. We can get into that conversation separately on how other comp plans get built to support that or not, but that's a separate conversation.
Okay. Yes, it
But
is.
for many other roles, I think giving them the insight. So, pick any role, for instance, customer service, great. An easy way to actually look at this is what is our retention and lifetime value of our clients? What changes when we do this part better? How do we look at this as it relates to why is it better, obviously, for us to have a higher lifetime value? What does it take to actually impact the lifetime value of a client? Why is that better for the organization? Why is that better for you as an employee? Getting that level of clarity and granularity is not that complicated to actually do this. It doesn't mean they need to be an expert in financial statements. You just give them the metric that's relevant to them, that they understand what their efforts actually impact.
And therefore, they're able to make decisions in context.
They're able to make decisions in context. If our goal, for instance, is to decrease retention and increase the lifetime value of a client, then when they're speaking to a customer, it's not just like, oh, great, how can I get them off the phone so they stop bothering me? It's like, oh, no, I need to make sure this customer remains happy over here because this is what we're working towards. We want to increase
Yes.
our lifetime value of a client. We want to decrease retention. Giving them that level of clarity of their function and role as it relates to the organization's health, I think is important. Again, how much you share with them, that depends on the organization. If you can, yeah, obviously tie their bonus or compensation to that number because that's what they get to impact as a department, as an organization. We've seen that be very effective with many companies. The entire customer service team, their bonus is based off of this number because that's what they can impact. Whatever as a team function, a team leader, whatever the executive in that space is tied to this. I mean, it's a lot of these kind of things. You tie their compensation to performance that they can actually impact. And then you can actually watch the result because then they'll actually hold each other accountable as well. You can't talk to a customer like this. This is going to impact what happens over here. Like it becomes that kind of conversation. You actually see the team accountability really play out.
Interesting. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I read somewhere that there were, I forget the exact number, hundreds of thousands of baby boomers that are in the process of selling their businesses. I'm sure many of them are going to be unpleasantly surprised that the value of their business is not nearly as much as they thought it was. So maybe speak a little bit about business owners and how they should start planning either for succession and or an exit.
So we jokingly refer to that, and this is not my own terminology. I just don't remember who I can give credit to, but people have already stolen it from me, so feel free to do the same. We refer to that as the silver tsunami that's coming.
Okay.
Okay, where that
Silver tsunami.
silver tsunami, yes, where that entire generation of business owners, there's some kind of transfer that's happening. So first, let's back up a second and clarify a couple things. We are very often, let's not forget about we. Every business owner exits their business one way or another. Every business owner exits their business. The only choice they have is whether it's on their terms or not. And to your point, when it comes to business owners getting ready to sell, universally, there's two things that happen which are just not true that every business owner believes. And therefore, when they get to this stage, if they wait till this stage to first start thinking about this, these are the shocks that they get. Number one, every business owner thinks their business is worth more than it is. Universally, every single one. Number two, every business owner thinks selling a business happens faster than it does. So those are two things that's really important, where as business owners start thinking about this, it's how do we prepare for what this sale will look like? We as CFOs are a very big believer in the concept of run your business like you will sell it, so you can, should you choose to. Now, when running a business like you will sell it means there are a couple really key things that need to be built to support that. Number one, as once you reach a certain size, and I use that qualification very specifically, make sure the business is not entirely dependent on you, your efforts, your reputation, and your contacts. Sales cannot be driven by and large by just the business owner's efforts and his knowledge and reputation, or his or her knowledge and reputation in the space. The decisions cannot be a autocratic kind of thing where everything needs to flow through this business owner for anything to happen in an organization. That's not scalable. People don't want, again, when we talk about selling or exiting or transitioning, whether it's going to a family member, whether that's going to employees, whether that's selling to a PE firm, selling to a strategic, selling to whatever selling looks like, whatever transferring looks like, all of these concepts all hold the same way of building a scalable organization as it relates to what do we need to build that's going to actually support that kind of transition. In addition, from the financial side, making sure you actually have reporting that is clean, that happens on a regular basis, that gives actual knowledge, that actually is reporting that you can actually point to and demonstrate on a regular basis, becomes really important in supporting a sale. I'll tell one horror story version of this just to really highlight this point. We were speaking to one business owner, and this is a fantastic success story. So it's really the American dream success story. This was a husband and wife team that literally started their business selling garbage bags out of the trunk of their car, and now it's a $25 million business, $5 million EBITDA, 7 locations. They own the real estate and the real. They've done phenomenally well. The problem wasn't they're thinking about selling. Then it became like, okay, let's take a look at what a buyer would look at, because as CFOs, we've been on both sides of this table, and we go through it. And it's like, look, you've built a fantastic business and it makes a lot of money. The problem is no one's going to give you the valuation you're looking for in this process, and here's why. There is no actual financial reporting system in place. Your accountant goes in once a year to make adjustments so you can file taxes, but there's no steady reporting that you can point to. It says, this is what's happening, this is what's here, this is how we actually operate, and this has been our performance. And if you don't have that, it's not that a deal can't be done. In this space, there's always a number where a deal can be done, but it's not going to get you the number you want, nor is it going to be structured the way you want. Because this particular couple were like, great, we just want a huge check and we're going to ride off into the sunset. And the answer is no one's going to give them that, because if you can't show this performance, then most of that's going to be on an earnout, and it's going to be a much lower number to begin with. Mm-hmm. So understanding what needs to be built in an organization to support that transition becomes really, really important.
Right. So I hear you. I 100% agree. And while your story was perhaps of lack of preparation, I will share a story that's been prevalent in the peer groups that I attend on a quarterly basis. The story is of an IT firm. I don't remember exactly where they were, but the owner was a husband and wife team. She, I think, was not really involved in the business. He went out diving, and there was a diving accident, and he passed away. Suddenly, he was, I think, in his 30s, maybe early 40s, young guy, and nobody knew how, what, where anything was and how to deal with any of it. And the ownership of the company became an issue, and clarity on decision making became an issue, and figuring out how to deal with the clients. And there were other family members that believed that they had stake in, and you're nodding because I'm sure you've seen situations like this. But if I was to draw one complete theme throughout everything that you've said, is getting to clarity is probably the most important thing that outsiders and maybe even insiders do. If it's on the numbers, if it's on the process, if it's on risk, if it's on how we run, what we're doing, what is our goal 5 years from now, and then build it backwards. But getting to clarity seems like a big theme in today's conversation.
It is. And it's also recognizing that how you get the clarity very often beyond a certain point is not something that's required of you to figure out how as a business owner. You've reached a certain point where the expertise becomes worth its weight in gold, is the common expression, and how it can actually get to that. And therefore, I would encourage business owners to at least explore the conversations with experts. Doesn't mean you hire them, doesn't mean you pay them, but at least explore the conversations, because just recognizing the perspective that others can bring to the table is usually has an exponential effect on businesses.
Yeah, and I hear that, Nelson. As somebody who both engages internally, externally, through co-managed or managed, appreciate the fact that having a team of experts creates outcomes that are very often greater than the sum of their parts.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Nelson, this was a great conversation. I thank you so much. And I want to say that we probably could continue this conversation for at least another couple hours.
Oh, for sure.
And certainly dive into many more of these topics. Hopefully we have an opportunity to do this once again, maybe in a few months. But for the moment, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank our sponsor. Ventures and Visionaries is sponsored by KJ Technology. KJ Technology is an advisory and cybersecurity process consulting services firm. It also provides fully managed IT services. For additional information, please email info@kjtechnology.com or call 646-556-6500. Nelson, how would a potential prospect or somebody who's interested in learning more about Pro CFO reach out to you?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is go to our website, procfopartners.com. We actually have a lot of content, a lot of free tools up on our website, so check them out. You can reach out directly there, or you can reach me via email, nelson.tepfer@procfopartners.com.
Nelson, this was great. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we get to speak again soon.
Thanks, Mordy. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.